All right, continuing on with Rian Winter, Sports Chat 503, Oregon fan, legend, and friend here of the show. Look, I think Oregon fans know about Ashton Jeanty at this point. If you don't, you should. He set a couple of Boise State records last week, 267 yards, 6 touchdowns. He had a 75-yard touchdown. I think he had a couple touchdowns over 50 yards. Like, he was running all over this Georgia Southern defense. And I want your thoughts on him first, Ryan, before we get to the other offensive weapon Oregon is going to have to slow down. I feel good about Oregon's defense going into this game. DJ Harmon had one of the best Pro Football Focus grades in the country last week. I thought the D-line looked as advertised, and I billed them as the best since 2014 coming into the season. I thought they were outstanding last week, and the holes that Ashton Jeanty had to run through last week were large. Let's just say the sorts that Sup With Your Girl used to sing about in I Love My Ducks. Like that's what he was running through last week. The Oregon secondary and linebacking unit, they're going to have to tackle really well in this game because Jeanty doesn't go down well in first contact. But I think Jeanty is going to get some yards. He might have a touchdown or 2 or maybe even 3. But I don't expect him to go bonkers and have some 200-plus yard scrimmage game.
I agree. He's very talented. I think Dan Lanning said he's the best running back he's seen since he's been at Oregon. Running backs are interesting because, you can see a guy that's real shifty, but he maybe not be a power guy. You can see a guy that's a power guy, might not be that shifty. Every once in a while, you catch a guy like Emmitt Smith, who's just absolutely perfect. It looks like he was created in a lab to be a running back, just fast enough to get your breakaway speed, but big enough to be able to handle a tackle, get a breakaway, that sort of thing. And I think that, the running back position it hasn't been as respected as of late in the last, 5-10 years or whatever, especially when it comes to the NFL, because it's hard to find those guys that can do everything. Rarely do you find a 3-down back. And they've talked about this in the NFL constantly. Well, this guy's good for a second down, but he's not a third down back. You never really heard that back in the day because you had great running backs that could do a variety of things. And I do think that this game is set up on the running game for them. I like the way that they ran the ball against Georgia Southern, but there wasn't much defense being played in that game on either side of the ball. And, the way that you win football games, in my mind, is you want to run the ball. As a former offensive lineman, as a guy who wants to put some hands on somebody, you want your running go straight north and south. You want your offensive lineman going north and south. You want your whole engine going that way, and you can control the clock that way. So I do think that Oregon kind of went away from the run a little bit. If you want to talk about Oregon's run, it felt like they panicked a little bit. It felt like they started to go out of the backfield. They started to throw extension of the running game, throw to the back. I don't think Boise State's going to do that at all. I think they have to lean on the run. I think they have to go run, pass instead of this kind of back and forth sort of offense. And I think the Ducks defense, I think you are right. I think that the especially Harmon, I thought played really well. But it's the front is closed in by those ends. They do such a good job with Mateo and with Birch. Those guys closed that.
Tuioti was active in week 1 too.
Tuioti, Purchase. There's a bunch of guys that can really squeeze the edge. The outside linebackers, Tosh. If you really investigate Tosh's defense versus anything else, there's action coming from somewhere, and it feels like they just squeeze that line of scrimmage up a little bit. And I think that's going to benefit the Ducks. I don't think that the Broncos are going to run away with this one at all. I do think that they're going to score, like you said. Probably going to get a couple touchdowns out of him for sure, but you're not having a banner day against this Duck defense. Not only that, but I think also the DBs and the safeties are going to come down and they want to hit. And if they know that you're not going to be throwing the ball over the top that much, that's even more pressure they're going to be putting on this. So you're not going to have these breakaways.
Yeah, I think for Oregon, the strategy's got to be force Maddox Madsen to beat you, but one guy who might get the shadow treatment from Jabbar Muhammad, the Washington transfer at corner, is Chris Marshall. This is a guy who's bounced around to a couple different colleges. He's had some eligibility and personal issues, but a mega talent, big-bodied receiver, 6'3", 6'4" type. You can't miss him when you see him on TV. And I was noticing that last week, Jabbar Muhammad did not stay in one position. He wasn't doing the Richard Sherman where he just lines up as, the left or right outside corner and he just stays there no matter who comes over to that particular side. And you think about last year, I think that's what he did while at Washington. He was shadowing Troy Franklin anywhere that he went. So I suspect that they'll take Jabbar, who is certainly cornerback one for this Ducks defense, and put him on Chris Marshall and say, does the rest of this receiving core have enough to push the Oregon secondary? And if you ask Boise State fans, they love this receiving core. And I had on Boise State radio voice Bob Beeler on yesterday's show, and he likes the receivers that they have, and Marshall was one of the guys that he listed. But I think in this receiving core, Maddox Madsen is not someone who I think wants to just throw to one guy. It's not like Justin Herbert, Dylan Mitchell situation. He wants to spread the ball around. But Marshall's the guy that stands out to me because that caliber of wide receiver talent you don't see come through Boise State very often. They've had some good guys over the years, but I mean, if he'd gotten things straightened out, he'd be playing at a Power 4 school and he'd be shining right now.
Right. I agree with that. Boise State always has guys. They always have NFL guys. You see it when they do their lineups at the beginning of the game, offensive, defensive guys. Boise State's always putting somebody in the league here and there. Wide receivers, though, few and far between, it feels like, comparatively. And they do have some guys. I had a guy on this week on my channel from Boise State as well, and they're very high on the wide receivers. I tend to look at it through the lens of, hey, man, if they can run the ball the way they can run the ball, your wide receivers are going to eat. They're going to be open. They're going to be able to get some opportunities. I don't care what quarterback you have in there. But it does feel like you're right. I think you need to have Madsen beat you, and I think that you need to basically close everything off up front to prove that they can do that.
And Maddox Madsen, I want your thoughts on this. He doesn't scare me, Ryan, but certainly he's not someone Oregon fans can overlook. He beat out Malachi Nelson and last year Taylon Green, who's now starting at Arkansas. He's not doing that by accident. You have two different head coaches that have looked at him and said, yeah, compared to this more highly touted recruit or the guy who's bigger and has a bigger arm, we want you to be quarterback. Like, he will make a couple of throws that'll get you. I just don't look at him as a guy that is going to go into Autzen Stadium and throw for anything more than, maybe the low 200s from a yardage standpoint. Maybe that's all Boise State needs. That's how they want to play with Dirk Koetter, their offensive coordinator. He's not a guy who's going to walk in and have a 300-yard game.
Right. Yeah. And it might be in him to be able to do that, but no, I agree. What I like about him is it feels like he's a real leader on the sideline. He was able to really galvanize his team. The clips that I saw from that game, and from what I heard from the guy that I had on from Boise State saying that, in the off season, a lot of the workouts that they were doing, everything else, he was leading a lot of that stuff, and that kind of shined through a little bit with them. The big thing for me is with a quarterback is, especially in college, you got to keep him in the pocket. Man, these guys, as soon as they get out of the pocket, can get kind of dangerous. The plays break down a little bit. You start playing some playground ball. I mean, we saw this with Caleb Williams. The moment that they hemmed him up and kept him between the tackles last year, all of a sudden he went from being like one of the best quarterbacks in the country to just kind of an average quarterback. And I think that sometimes you got to keep these guys in the pocket. I think that you're going to have some big looks this week. I think guys are going to try to be hungry, get after the quarterback defensively. And again, if you know that Boise State wants to establish the run, when they do go back to pass, you're going to have to make them pay for it.
Yeah, and I think this Oregon secondary, I was surprised we didn't see Cam Alexander last week when Jalil Florence did not play. Alexander was an all-conference guy at UTSA last year, came in 24/7, had him as a 4-star recruit in the transfer portal. I wonder if he plays this week or if we see a lot more of Nico Reed, or if we see a lot more of Dante Manning at that other corner position. I thought Dante had a nice game last week against Idaho, to be sure. Ryan and I are going to wrap up. Yeah. No, go ahead.
I agree with both those guys. I think Nico Reed is primed to have a really good game as well. Yeah.